joining from Kansas City today. I was just talking to Dr. Eloise before we recorded. I am at a high explosives conference with about 250 scientists from around the world who are not very social. And I am not used to going to a conference and not having people socialize and have drinks and do dinner. So if you were to walk out in the hotel, it looks like there's not even an event happening and it's almost like the conference of ghosts. So very, very different than our world, Dr. Eloise.
Yeah, I have so many questions, and I think that could be a whole nother episode. I I don't even know where to go with that.
Let's just say that scientists don't seem to want to have a lot of conversations.
That's totally fair. Well, if you're in Kansas City, it's worth noting that I'm in the middle of my sabbatical or extended vacation. I'm taking a couple months off this summer just to recharge and hopefully start working on my next book. I have started. It's going very, very, very slowly because
What
I
what does
am
what does starting mean when you say you've
just
started?
researching, so reading, watching particular videos, taking notes, and just sort of framing out an outline. I have some ideas on my whiteboard here.
So it's like the
So
creative process.
totally like the creative process, and I have a couple different ideas that are competing with one another. So
So does
uh,
it mean the book outline will be
yeah.
done for the end of the sabbatical? Is that what that is fair to
Oh
say?
no, I hope to get like I can so like my current book is was like 60,000 words. So if I can get the outline sorted out, my goal by the time I come back is to get 20 or 30,000 words written, maybe 35,000, and then I take another little break over the holidays and crank out the rest of it.
Okay. I have not yet written a book. I admire people who do because I know how hard it is to actually dedicate time to thinking about what you're going to write and then actually writing it.
Well, it sounds when you say it that way, it sounds so academic, but the reality is I will spend hours on TikTok and YouTube and bouncing between the two, just completely lost down rabbit holes, or even doing nothing related to research, just like going
Mhm.
randomly down things. Or the other thing that will happen, this happens a lot in grad school, is you end up just cleaning. I'm just gonna clean. Like this drawer needs cleaning because I don't want to write.
It's the whole disconnect from technology and then your brain starts working.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
All
So,
right, so what are we going to talk about today? Sorry, I
all right.
interrupted you.
So, no. It's all like this is great. So we're gonna start. I want to talk about IT and AI in the news, and this is something that's timeless, and so we can always come back to this. But there's just been a lot happening, and this is a really bad time to be on sabbatical with the U.S. election just hitting overdrive right now. So and so we are going to touch a little bit on what's happening here because there's some one of the little the articles are related to that. However, before we go any further, it's worth noting that I am a I love music, but I love Johnny Cash, and there's this is going to be sort of my guiding principle, and I think it's that I bring to all these discussions. And there's this great song by Johnny Cash. It's called "The One on the Right Is on the Left," and the refrain is and this is about a four-piece band and and the this is what's so brilliant about the song is each person has a position, right? There's the one plays on the left of the band, one plays on the right, one in the center, and of course the drummer's in the back. And so there's a play on words where it says, well, the one on the right was on the left, meaning left politically. The one in the middle was on the right, right politically, and the one on the left was in the middle, and the guy in the rear was a Methodist. Which that part of the refrain I don't understand. Anyway. So, but as the song goes, and I highly recommend people
We
listen to
will
this.
we'll link it to the notes. If
Totally.
you haven't heard the song, we'll make it super easy for you.
And so, in the end, without spoiling too much, essentially their political differences lead them
Mhm.
to the band breaking up. And so, one of the final uh, uh, refrains is if you have political convictions, keep them to yourself. And so, as I was preparing for this episode, I thought I would start with this song just as a level set. Sarah, I don't know where you are politically. I have never mentioned where I am
Yep.
politically, and I never will. So, so don't read into anything. But as we go into a very important time, especially here in the U.S., that has global implications, I think it is worth talking about how IT and even AI are getting into that. So that's my big wind up. And where I wanted to start is the tech in the U.S. presidential election. And two things caught my eye over the last couple of weeks. And the first one was, if you're not aware, there was a Kamala or Vice President Harris. There was a series of fundraisers that have been grouped by category. So the first one was Black women for Harris. And what was interesting about that is they got 1,000. Well, actually, there was 40,000 women that Black women that participated on this fundraising call.
Which is a crazy turnout, I must add.
Totally crazy. And so, but what caught my attention was is that the limit for Zoom is 1,000 users, and I didn't know that. And then if you read in the articles further, it said that somebody called the Zoom president or whomever. I come to find out later that it was one of the vice presidents that Zoom worked for, or was on the call. So she got it expanded to 40,000, and so all of a sudden you have, it just struck me that you could, oh, hey, just call up somebody and get the max number of Zoom expanded. And then it gets better is the next night there was a white women for for Harris,
Mhm.
and there was 164,000, and the headline said they broke Zoom. So I thought that was really interesting that here we have technology that is becoming really, we all learned Zoom over the pandemic and lockdown, and now it's taking on a new way of being embedded, and there are limitations. And then, hey, you know what, you can just call you can either call somebody up and get those limitations removed or these restrictions abated, but on the same time you can actually blow these systems up, which is what happened on the second one. So
So
I
it makes me think of Clubhouse. So I don't know how many of our listeners remember back in the day, Clubhouse had a big luck factor in that they launched before COVID.
yep.
And they had and if you haven't ever heard of Clubhouse, Google Clubhouse. They kind of were the first ones to make audio only cool. Other platforms like Twitter and LinkedIn have done it much better. Clubhouse, in my opinion, should have sold to somebody like a Twitter or a LinkedIn,
Yep.
and they would have had a very nice exit versus kind of fading off into the woodwork as they've done. But they had a whole VIP, which I think kind of helped and hurt them at the beginning. I think it helped them. It made it kind of this elite thing that, ooh, I really want to get into Clubhouse and I need to get an invite. I think it eventually became too restrictive and hindered their growth. But I was one of the quote early users of Clubhouse, and that I had somebody who got in early, had some invites. I got an invite. And I used to host when I was in marketing procurement. There's a woman named Tina in the UK who's a brilliant thought leader in the marketing procurement space. So her and I teamed up and we hosted a Clubhouse room every month. Procurement Foundry also was very big in Clubhouse. I think Mike did like one or two rooms a week. And what you're saying made me think about Clubhouse because people kept breaking Clubhouse. So you would have a room. Now, mine never got that crazy big. I mean, I was like 15 or 20 people, right? But they would have rooms like a celebrity would come on. I remember one
Yeah.
time they had Elon Musk come on,
Yeah.
and
Hmm.
I think he was one of the people that quote broke Clubhouse. And what they did was they had a team in real time because Clubhouse was still kind of a small startup, even though they grew really quickly, and people would in real time be making changes to the platform. So Elon gets on, it quote breaks, then they start expanding. Okay, we can add another 100, we can add 200, we can add 300. So it was like very real time. Not in the exact case of you pick up a phone and call a VP, but in this case, they had real time people making changes based on what was happening in the platform. So kind of makes me think of similar type experience of how people use Clubhouse, and now they're kind of moving back to Zoom platforms.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's fascinating and it's worth watching. And we're going to talk about AI in a second. But with all the AI hype, remember that smartphones,
Yeah.
Zoom, some of these more Microsoft Word or PowerPoint, Excel for sure, these standard technologies, we still haven't moved off of them. And a lot of this is how we still do our day-to-day jobs. And I think as you talk about the AI backlash, part of this is, well, if you want to get 40,000 or 100,000 or X amount of
Mhm.
thousand on a fundraising call, because that's the goal, fundraising today, whatever the goal is, like, you're going to use Zoom, not whatever Chat GPT.
Yeah. And I've noticed in the election side note is text messages have become really popular again.
Yeah.
So no matter what candidate you follow, if you've signed up for something, you're probably, I know I'm seeing an increase in text messages actually from multiple candidates because I like to sign up and see what marketing they're doing for
Yep.
their campaigns. And I've definitely noticed that's kind of seems to be a popular avenue for communication.
Well, and this gets to a thing that is important is as the generations change, and just a sidebar, Sarah and I have talked about doing a generations in the
Yeah.
workforce and how technology and marketing. So that'll be a future episode. But as you think about, so when my wife and I went to grad school in Ohio in 2008, we got there in August or just September, and we were completely inundated with, oh, at the time
Yeah.
it was Obama and McCain, and Biden and Palin. I mean, like you couldn't open a newspaper back. That was the last bit of newspapers. You broadcast media, you were just inundated, signs everywhere. And coming from California, that was so weird, because the only time candidates come to California is to use it as an ATM machine and
Yeah, we're
collect
a
some money.
fundraising state. It's already been decided, at least what people think in
Yeah, and
California.
so you go to Ohio in the midst of a really contentious, not negatively, but just a really hot election. I mean, they were having events in Ohio in person all the time,
Mhm.
and it was like, wow, like this is crazy. And so, but the really thing that I think is interesting is since 2016, I think it's 20 million, over 20 million baby boomers have passed away, and during that same, since 2022, Gen Z, 8 million of voting age have come of age. And so the question is, if you can do all this fundraising and spend money in advertising, are you doing, and this gets to what you were talking about, I think a couple of weeks ago, Sarah, is do you do broadcast media?
Yeah.
Do you do mailers, print mailers, or do you do TikTok and other digital media? Because I think we are at this inflection point technologically where so those marketing dollars or those whatever you spend those dollars on. I mean, I mean, as somebody that has wasted a lot of time in the last 4 weeks on TikTok, I can tell you that is a very powerful messaging platform.
Mhm. So let's talk about any other examples before we talk about AI. I know there's a lot that has come out in the last, I don't know, even 6 months in the news about AI.
Well, I would just want to just place a bookmark that I think we're going to have more of these conversations about the role of technology in elections. There's certainly a lot of discussion about the role of technology in war right now, and so I think it is just. I think there's a shift change in just these technological platforms and how we're seeing them in politics.
And how regulations are being used for or against in elections, right? There's a ton of controversy around are people, quote, rigging the elections through social media restrictions.
Yes, and all yes, and there's so much regulation that will come. It really does feel like the Wild West, and at least here in the U.S., the Congress and even the presidency and the Supreme Court, none of them understand this tech. I mean, it was embarrassing to watch Zuckerberg and all the tech folks go there and testify to Congress a couple years ago, like asking like, how does Facebook make money? Like they don't even know how it works, and so like there's just so much. I think one thing is we need a much more, and this is true in all governments, much more, or at least representative governments, better understanding of by our leaders of how this technology works. Because yeah,
Yeah, I mean, it's like it's hard for some people, I think, who are still in very senior political positions to understand that companies can make lots of money and not sell a good or service.
yeah,
And so I think that whole mindset shift alone is can cause a lot of challenges if the whole companies sell because of data. And most
yep,
organizations are data companies now. And you have to understand how that works if you're going to be in politics or some political position because data impacts everything.
yes. And I also something I advocate for vociferously and will till the end of time is that any data that is related to me and is generated by me, I should own that. To me, that's a fundamental human right. Now, I may be in the minority on that right now, or maybe folks aren't really thinking about it, but ultimately, I don't want Facebook profiting off my data or TikTok or whomever. Well, maybe TikTok's okay, but no, I'm just kidding.
Well,
But
an
LinkedIn,
exception.
yeah, exactly. But I should get to choose, and they shouldn't get to take my data, even because of their. Yeah, anyway, I think we have, as a global society, we reckon with data. And by the way, this extends to businesses. I think businesses should own their own data too.
Mhm. Which is a whole probably another podcast conversation around how that works when you're so heavily dependent on your suppliers.
Yes, yes, exactly. But I think that's a great segue into AI because well, of course, AI is built upon data, and there's a lot of reckoning to be done on all this data that's being used to train all these fancy Gen AI models. However, I think there was going sort of back to AI. There's been some criticism lately, and it seems like, and shout out to John Hanson. He's been writing about this lately. Is there a bit of an AI backlash, and could we have even a AI bubble crash? And is that inevitable? Because there's a ton of money, there's a ton of companies, and there's a colossal amount of hype. And so there's two articles that really jumped out at me. Uh, the first one is that uh, is McDonald's pulled back their AI ordering from drive-throughs. So I guess they had put in AI ordering at their drive-throughs, and they did it at 100 restaurants, and it didn't didn't turn out very well, and so they pulled back. And they will probably try it again. But here's the piece that is so important, and I think this gets at the core of this. And I'm quoting from the article: the company had worked with IBM to develop and test a AI-driven
Mhm.
voice automated ordering at some of its restaurants. And then it goes on, says IBM remains a trusted partner, and we will still utilize many of their products across our global system, but the company suggested it will look at AI partners other than IBM. And you can already know, I'm going to get wound up here. Like that is code for, that is marketing speak for IBM was clearly the wrong choice. Some lazy CIO thought that they were being cool because they had a contract with IBM, and IBM brought in a bunch of folks with fancy PowerPoints to say, we do AI, Watson, blah, blah, blah.
And nobody tested it as an end user probably, right?
No, never. So if you want to do AI, here's a tip. Here's a pro tip. Don't use the IBM or any of the big players. They're not incented for success. Their incentive structure is to sell you more software.
AKA checking off a box.
Exactly. Which it leads me to another article that I think is exactly like these two are just like when you read them, it's just like, of course. So this one's titled A CIO Cancels a Microsoft AI Deal That Should Worry the Tech Industry. And the highlights of this article, so this is an unnamed CIO, although they gave his first name Greg. I did go Googling him. So from a big pharma company, Greg, CIO from a big pharma company. I have a sneaking suspicion I know who it is, but I'm not going to say it half baked. So if anybody knows who this Greg is, I'd be curious. But essentially, this pharma company stopped using Microsoft's Copilot AI tool, citing the high cost and low value. And they used Copilot, Office 365 Copilot for 500 staff, and they compared the output to middle school presentations. And at the same time, Microsoft is repackaging its 365 licenses to better monetize AI features, quote unquote, amid record spending. And so the article quotes Greg as saying the price is double. An enterprise version of 365 is $34 a user per month, and adding the AI Copilot's another $30 per user per month. And so for 500 employees, that was $180,000 more per year that they got no value out of. So I think we are seeing, I'll be curious for your reaction, but I think we are seeing some like real world problems with AI and the hype.
So, question for you, why do you think large organizations like IBM and Microsoft, I totally get why they need to do AI, they need to say, they need to stay relevant, they need to check a box. Why are they not buying up smaller AI companies that actually are doing AI better that they could then just add into their, why are they trying to build it and do it on their own?
I think a few reasons. So one, you have internal politics. So companies that big have different fiefdoms, and people want to own their, like, it's just corporate politics for one. Two, they are acquiring companies, and they will continue to acquire them. But that actually kills the innovation. And I'm not saying it's wrong to acquire these companies, but essentially there's a transition phase where of 18 months where those companies come in, get sort of acculturated to whatever and big enterprise tech enterprise way of working, and they lose their flexibility, and ultimately uh, they become sort of part of the problem, if you will.
Mhm. So interesting. I want to bring in a procurement reference here. So I hosted my Shaken Not Stirred procurement group yesterday. And one of the members in our discussion mentioned, and she didn't say the name of the company. I could probably do some digging and figure out it's on the East Coast. I think it's based in the Connecticut area. And they have just replaced almost their entire planning department with AI. So they went through and said, okay, we have X number of planners. They eliminated almost every position. They have a skeleton crew still remaining that's taking the data and the outputs from AI and making the decisions. They just started this process. So I'm really curious to see. So the two examples you gave weren't necessarily eliminating roles, right? This is actually coming in and eliminating an entire group of people within an organization and replacing it with AI.
So for planning, and I think that's great because planning departments have struggled, and I'm going to censor myself there, but they have struggled mightily. And when you're doing planning in Excel, you know you're just lost because that's just and you go to most planning groups. And Carney has some statistics. We have there's a group that is dedicated to planning, and planning transformations fail at a ridiculous rate. Not as bad as digital transformations, although digital transformations are somewhere between 84% and 100% of failures. But planning is right, transformations are right behind that. So why not? Is my answer to that. Why not just do, because the AI eventually is going to do it. And the thing with planning is it's pattern based. So and it's pretty much statistical modeling. And this is one area where machine learning does really real, by the way, machine learning, not AI, much more true analytics. When you get that done, it does it much better. And if you want to see examples of that, Amazon has an amazing set of planning that to run their operations. Actually, I quoted an article in my book. Whereas taking an order from a
Yeah.
human that's in a car with a dog and a screaming baby, and you're at a McDonald's and the person saying, "I want a pup cup," and the AI doesn't know what a pup cup is. For those that don't know, it's a you go to Starbucks, you get a little cup of whipped cream for your dog. Um, so like trying to get the AI to learn what that all of that is and what those permutations are. That's why consumer AI has struggled. But for planning, amen, 100% behind that.
So I think the point is there's we're hearing about it in the news a lot. We're hearing about some pretty major failures. I also think we're going to have a counter and we're going to hear about some wins. Now, how public all of these wins are going to be, I don't know. If I'm an organization and I eliminate, 500 or 1,000 jobs, am I going to want to necessarily publicize that globally to the world and say we just were able to replace all these people effectively with AI? But to your point, I think it's really going to depend on the use case. I think for me as a consumer, it's frustrating when it's involved in the customer service process when you are trying to speak to somebody and you have this annoying AI robot that keeps saying the same thing or doesn't understand what you're talking about. When you
Yes.
call a lot of organizations, I feel like that's a really strong use case of how people are trying out AI. Now, why that's the first use case for AI, I don't know either. Like, of all the things organizations could pick to try AI with, the data analytics kind of repetitive tasks seem like the low hanging fruit, whereas the customer interface seems like the last thing you would be targeting and focused on.
Exactly. And then McDonald's article shows that, but also the customers, I get so frustrated with customer service that is AI because it is not, and often almost 99% of the time, it's not done well. And you're just left frustrated and screaming. At least I'm screaming at the phone. And yeah, or it's telling me to go download the app, and then I go download the app and it doesn't work. It's just like we have to do better.
The other, and I don't know if this necessarily fits, is AI in the news, but the other thing I've heard, I try to ask people when I have conversations like, "How are you personally using AI today?" Because I'm really curious of the use cases. I use, which I mentioned in the episode that came out last week, I use Fathom as my AI note taker for every call that I'm on, assuming somebody doesn't ask me to turn it off, it's always running. And I've heard organizations that are now banning software like that because they're concerned about catching something on tape that an employee says with a supplier, and then it being captured incorrectly in the notes.
Mm,
So the notes are not perfect. So it could say something incorrectly in the notes that could then, I guess, cause liability issues towards the organization. So
yep.
crazy to me, because I think it's a huge productivity tool and I'm a big fan. But you have instances like that where organizations, I think, are cracking down.
Yeah. And I think we'll see more of that. And this gets back to your point about regulation. I mean, the other thing that the flip side of that is you have this uh, privacy and even if I agree to it, like you could be recording malfeasance, which there's been plenty of that
Yeah,
over the
and who
years.
actually is gonna spend 30 minutes reading the privacy clause on every place you go that says you accept the terms? I'm not.
No, I'm not either, and yeah, I never do, and so then you might be inadvertently capturing, like if it becomes so ubiquitous nobody thinks about it, you might be capturing fraud or some sort of something that's not above board, and so now you have a different liability issue, or you have criminal issues, which gets to this right about broader thing about where they're putting cameras everywhere and everything's being recorded. Like, what rights do we have in terms of privacy and the surveillance state?
So interesting that you say that. We were just in Australia a few weeks ago, and one of the things that we noticed is all of their roads appear to be under surveillance.
Yeah,
So when you're driving, you'll see it's actually like labeled and you'll see cameras. And supposedly, luckily, we did not run into this, but they are looking at anybody who's going over the speed limit through their cameras. And it feels very icky and big brotherish like when you're
yeah.
driving around, knowing that everything you're doing is being recorded and that somebody could potentially come after you. And being an outsider from another state, I don't know how to drive on the other side of the road. So I'm going to be doing things a little bit differently because I'm not from the country. And so I don't know, I just didn't like that feel.
Well, I get used to it because it's going to, I think it's going to get worse and worse. And there's actually an interesting, if for those of you who are fans of Ed Helms, he has a podcast called Snafu and talks about uh, failures, historical failures, and he's got one now on the FBI break-in that led to the FBI is the America's internal federal force, and they were collecting data in the 60s and 70s on everybody who was in the civil rights, who was black, queer, and they created this massive surveillance state back before you had tech doing this at scale. And anyway, the whole show right now is about the activist that broke into a, and nobody knew it at the time, and it broke the trust with the public. And I think there is this question, again, not trying to get political, but like, when you are collecting all that data, so now there's a whole bunch of data about you, Sarah, in some database in
Yeah,
Australia,
which is
and
kind of creepy to think about.
right, and you didn't do anything wrong, and but yet, if you accidentally did something wrong at the airport, they can now go back and they have all this data to draw from and pull into a profile about Sarah. And I think that should, because now technology is capturing that at such a rapid pace, and with AI, this is where it starts to coalesce. That's seriously concerning. I know, and I'm putting my tinfoil hat on right now, but I think it's important because it to bring it back to elections, like the, the same data is used to at least target, if not manipulate, users to vote a particular way. It's used to sell a particular way, and it is used in criminal matters.
You mentioned a podcast I also want to throw out there. One of my favorite AI podcasts that I've been listening to, and I have it pulled up so I can tell you exactly, it's called The Artificial Intelligence Show. And the host is Paul Roetzer. It's Roetzer. And they come on every week and report what's happening in the news as it relates to AI, and then he gives his perspective. And I've seen him speak twice in person, and he is a phenomenal speaker and has a really masterful way of taking AI, which is kind of this big scary topic, and breaking it into something that most people can actually understand. So if you're looking for some education, I would definitely recommend following him on LinkedIn and checking out his podcast. I wanna throw um, one other curveball here in the conversation as it relates to folks that are working in procure tech. be really careful, since we're talking about AI in the news, be really careful about how you message AI in your product. So if you are working for an organization that actually has legit AI, be careful about how you communicate on the on your website, in your collateral, in your messaging. If AI becomes too buzzwordy, I almost feel like you're going to get lost in the noise, and then you're actually going to cause confusion to your buyer by people not really understanding what you do. So focus on outcomes over features when you're talking about your product, and be really, really thoughtful and intentional around how you message AI.
And what's worse, is when they come in and acknowledge it and say, yes, yeah, I know everybody comes in talking about AI, so I'm not going to do it. AI, 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 AI. Like like they make a joke about it and then they keep doing it. So
And if
and it,
if your product isn't really AI focused, that's okay. You don't
right.
have to have an AI product, and don't say that you have a product that does these specific AI driven things if you really don't. Smart people will see through that very quickly.
Right. And it's back to my thing, like look at the beginning, like Zoom. Like Zoom is looking pretty valuable right now because it's become the thing versus, I don't know, Copilot or I'm not picking on them or whatever nonsense IBM's come out with. Like right now, it's like Zoom is the thing and way more profitable and it's far simpler and much more tangible. And to put it in the procure tech realm, like a sourcing tool doesn't need
No.
10 gazillion AI things, just needs to be a good, oh, no, an amazing user experience. And that's the thing.
So in your messaging, again, really think twice about talking too much about AI. Now, it's important that your sales team is armed with a responses to AI questions, because they will come up when you're having conversations, or if there's an RFP or an RFQ, but it doesn't mean it needs to be plastered everywhere in everything that you're saying in messaging. So just for all the marketers out there, messaging matters and is really, really important. And talking too much about AI, I think, can actually hurt you.
All right. So since you brought up buzzwords and just to sort of, I just want to wrap it. I don't want to get on this rabbit hole, but I'm just curious. It may be one sentence or a couple. What's your whole thing on this augmented reality headset thing?
Yeah, so I don't know if I'm the best. So I've tested it out at conferences before. Like there's been booths, and I'll go in and I'll try it out. I personally, in my day-to-day life, it's not something that's a priority for me, or that I have been super excited about and jumped on the bandwagon and said, I have to have this. Now, caveat, I am not a video gamer.
Right.
To me, I feel like a very simple use case or application is for people who play video games. So I would say if I was a video gamer, I would probably have a very different response.
Right. So, because I mean, I think this, everybody has been trying to prop this AR, VR thing up for a long time. I mean,
Mhm.
I'm old enough to remember Second Life, and I got caught up in that hype, which turned out to be silly. And this whole like meta thing with Zuckerberg
And
and
he spent what?
even
How many billions on this for it
I
to
don't
just
know.
kind of be a dead end?
Dead end. And I know why he did it. He wanted to control the device that accesses, because right now he's at Apple and Google's whim. So I understand the desire, but which so he could collect and manage the throughput to the platform, but it just was so ill-fated. And but yet I still feel like people are trying to convince us that this is a thing, and I'm not buying it. Again, it's back to, I'll take Zoom any day over Copilot or what, or
Mhm.
Watson or whatnot. And I just think as we close out here, it's important to think about, and to the question you asked folks, like how are you really using
Yeah.
this stuff and what are you really using? And I think I get more use out of my Apple Watch than I do out of my AI tools right now, even though By the way, I'm still a proponent of AI. I am in exploring, doing my journey, but yeah.
So my closing thought on this topic, for me, how I describe AI and how it benefits me is it's a productivity tool. So I am focused on increasing my productivity this year. I recently started a new job and I'm really being conscious about managing my time and being really thoughtful and intentional about what I focus my efforts on. So anything that's going to help me be more productive, that's AI focused, are the things that I'm focused on and adopting. Outside of that, it's not as a huge thing for me as maybe for some other folks.
So that begs the question: is a productivity enhancer worth the gazillions of dollars being spent on this? There's no answer to that. We won't know that for a long time.
All right. Well, thanks for tuning in today. We will see you back next Wednesday. If you are not subscribed to our YouTube channel, feel free to hit the subscribe button. And we have a form in the notes for all of our shows. If you have a specific question or comment that you'd like to share about a past show or a topic that you are interested in having us discuss, drop that in that form as well.